Good morning, everyone. If we could please take our seats. Thank you. Go ahead, Chair. We're live.
Thank you and welcome. I'm calling to order this meeting of the October 29th, 2024 Board of Supervisors meeting. And in his last couple weeks, I'd like to ask Chief Martin to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. And could we have roll call, please?
Supervisor Berryessa?
Here.
Supervisor Gregory?
Here.
And Vice Chair Cottrell?
Here.
And please note that Supervisor Joelle Gallagher and Supervisor Belia Ramos are excused from this meeting today.
Thank you. And now it is time for the pet of the week. And I believe we have Bella the Husky here this morning. Wonderful. And what can you tell us this morning about this lovely dog?
Good morning. So Bella is an absolutely exceptional girl. She's pretty dainty. She's a husky mix. She came into the shelter in August, and she was found as a stray in the unincorporated area of Napa County. She has been amazing since she's been at the shelter. She's very gentle. She's very docile for a husky. She does play groups with the other dogs. She's loved every dog that she's met so far. She's a volunteer staff favorite for sure. She's just a great girl. I just don't know why she's been at the shelter for so long. But this is Bella. An exceptional husky would make a great first-time husky for somebody who's interested in owning a husky. They've proven to be difficult dogs to own. So, but she would make a great first-time husky for someone. So, anyway, this is Bella. Adoption fees are waived this week, so please come down and adopt Bella.
Thank you so much. And Bella might need to take a tour of the room before you head out. So, thank you. All right, and as Bella parades around, we will move on to our next agenda item. We have no proclamations or commendations this week, and on our consent calendar for special districts, we will not be hearing item 5A today. That item will be dropped from the agenda and brought back at a later date. So that brings us to item 6, the consent calendar. Do we have any board comments or items to pull off the consent calendar this morning? Is there anyone wishing to make public comment in the room or on the phone? Okay, please come up to the microphone. And this is public comment for items 6A to 6B. 6P.
No? Never mind.
Never mind. Okay. False alarm. All right, and nothing on the phone? Okay.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, motion by Supervisor Pedroza, second by Supervisor Gregory. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. All right, item number 7, public comment this morning. Do we have folks in the room that would like to make public comment? Wonderful. And if you can tell us your name and where you live, that'd be great.
Okay, my name is Valerie Wolf, and I live at 389 Franklin Street here in town. And I'm here to make public comment on the film A Dying River, which I hope you have taken the time to view. It was supposedly put in your ability to watch it. And so residing in the Napa Valley with a landscape slowly being stripped of its canopy clothing that helps to slow, sink, and spread the seasonal input of rain, and now the continued sucking dry of the ancestral groundwater input to supply water through pumping to a bloated monocrop culture wine industry with no voice for the dying ecosystem. Okay, so with no voice for the dying ecosystem, I had to come and be a voice for the voiceless. I'm speaking for birds, fish, plants, trees, crawling and flying bugs and butterflies, and all those that we assume are okay without us, the two-leggeds, paying attention to how they survive and thrive. I've seen the drill rigs so many times driving up the valley, pumping, 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 pumping the lifeblood out of our struggling ecosystem. Who cares who will stop the theft of an intact Napa River for anyone coming after us? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wolf. Good morning, Mr. Hawley.
Good morning. Thank you, Vice Chair. Jason Hawley, American Canyon City Manager. On behalf of our City Council, have a simple request, although albeit for somewhat complicated reasons. Next Wednesday, your Planning Commission, sitting as the Airport Land Use Commission, is scheduled to adopt a new airport land use compatibility plan. The current draft has flaws, and our request today is that you direct staff to postpone that hearing. We think 90 days should be sufficient amount of time to eliminate the flaws. Importantly, postponement will also provide an opportunity to ensure that the composition of the commission is consistent with state law, and that's the more complicated part. Public Utilities Code Section 21670-B specifies that an airport land use commission consists of 2 members appointed by the mayors of the county, also known as the City Select Committee, 2 members appointed by the Board of Supervisors, and 2 members who are experts in aviation that are appointed directly by the airport managers themselves. In this case, I think we only have 1 in the county. Think of it as sort of a 2-by-2-by-2 commission. Then those 6 members actually appoint a 7th member. And it appears from our research, at least Sonoma and Solano counties, our neighbors, are following this process. So this postponement would also allow for the commission to be reconstituted consistent with that provision of state law, and hopefully would result in a more fully considered plan. So thank you for your time this morning. I'm happy to address any questions, and take care.
Thank you, Mr. Hawley.
I'm Chris Craker, architect in Browns Valley. I've been practicing in this business for about 50 years. I've been an architect licensed for 40, 30 in Napa. People come to me as clients thinking that I have some magic with county processing. There's no magic, there's no rhyme, there's no reason, there's no logic at all. On June 19th, a house I was working on up on France School Road burned to the ground during construction. My client immediately asked me to start design for a new home for him, and he asked his GC for a demo permit for the charred ruins, which was right next to a creek. On August 27th, we received back from the county a plan check requiring us to destroy the existing septic system, including the tank, and we had to ask for a permit. The planning department insisted the burned down residence now became non-conforming, and we now had to convert the existing guest cottage, which was a garage and a shack, it was a guest cottage, into the primary residence. We had to add a 150 square foot kitchen. My house doesn't have a kitchen that big. The options given us were to submit for a new home on the site, or create a secondary home, a primary home from the shack. That doesn't happen overnight. It takes months and months just to design a house, but we did have a house in the progress. We sent it to the planning staff. That meant nothing to them. Return calls are next to impossible with this staff. The list goes on and on. Our options were to apply for a single-family home or the guest home, just to get a demo permit for a ruined residence. We had to apply for a new permit for everything, and we did. We had to plead with the planning department that this was next to a creek, and with 2 rains already, we knew that there's going to be more damage. The environmental department continued to hold out on whether or not one of the rooms in this shack, this guest cottage, was a den or a bedroom in order to use the existing standalone septic system. And we already had a permit to modify this thing, and the county had already approved them. Finally, we got a demo permit last week, 5 months after the fire. The bedroom issue is still up unresolved, even though a permit was issued. Napa County bureaucracy is daunting. The Department of No is lost in a quagmire of unreasonable, uncompromising rules that preempt any logic. And the do not reply on everything that gets sent out is ridiculous. It's impossible. You can't talk to anybody. When someone comes to me with a request to do something in Napa, the first thing I ask is it in the city or the county? If it's in the county, I double the fee. Hopefully we'll get this mess cleaned up, and before the next rains, which could cause some serious damage and damage to the county. I already have a Christmas Architect's Angle article written, and it's about Santa Claus's county home that burned down, and he tried to get a demo permit. It'll be interesting. Take care.
Thank you, Mr. Craker. You know, our Director of Planning and Building is here, and so, Mr. Bordona, would you be able to chat with Mr. Craker on his way out here? Wonderful. Thank you. Any other public comment? Good morning, Ms. Malin.
Good morning. Hi, Chris Malin, Executive Director of the Institute for Conservation, Advocacy, Research, and Education. We also have an active group of citizens that kayak the Napa River, and we've been doing that since 2000. We've seen a steady decrease in the amount of water coming down the Napa River, and over the years, our kayaking trips have really become more portaging trips. It's been seriously alarming because we've seen in the later spring, early summer, we see the Napa River turn to isolated pools. And we've seen dying Chinook, which are threatened fish, threatened salmon dying in isolated pools. This year, when we heard of 2 dead beavers on the Napa River, so we went out to look at that, and we couldn't find them, but they were at the Pope Street Bridge, and there was a big chatter about it on email. There was a beaver dam near the Pope Street Bridge, and the 2 dead beavers were there. So when I went there to look, I'd never seen this before, but the Napa River was completely dry for as far as I could see, and that was the video that I sent you, the dying Napa River. I sure hope you have a chance to look at it. But that just inspired a whole indigenous movement, and we gathered at the river 2 weeks ago, and there was heartfelt prayers by indigenous WAPO and First Peoples of Napa, the WAPO, and First Peoples of Lake County, the POMO, and they came and did prayers. And in the meantime, I was thinking about the technical Groundwater Advisory Committee meeting where Ludorf and Scalamanini pointed out the monitoring data and a summary of the monitoring wells. And they clearly pointed out in their presentation that there's a lack of stream gauges. And we only have 2 in Napa County. One's at the Pope Street Bridge and one's at Oak Knoll. And that's just highly insufficient. And Ludorf and Scalamanini points that out and says we need at least 8. And I know that there was, in the budget, there was money for stream gauging, and I don't know if those stream gauges have been put in. But between a lack of stream gauges and a lack of dual monitoring wells, you won't know how bad the Napa River is. As far as being a clean flowing river, supporting numerous species and endangered species like coho salmon, Chinook salmon, steelhead, California freshwater shrimp. So I hope we get those wells in because we need that data very badly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Malin. Anyone else in the room or on the phones? No. Okay. Thank you. for the public comment this morning. And with that, we will move to item number 8, Board of Supervisors reports and announcements. Good morning.
Morning. None here.
None? Okay, thank you. I wanted to quickly report on 2 events yesterday. There was the Heritage House opening, which was very exciting, and sort of evidence of all the partnerships that have to happen to get affordable housing and supportive housing built in the county. And so it was a wonderful city, county, state, federal, and lots of nonprofit partners there too. And a wonderful nod to Joe Peatman, who first had the idea to convert an elderly residential home to permanent supportive housing. So great to be there. And then yesterday also in town was our assembly member, Cecilia Aguiar Curry. She took a tour of the farm worker housing up at River Ranch. And I think it was wonderful for staff to tell about the work that's happening there, and also thank her for her efforts with the Joe Cerna funding that will provide funding for a total of 10 years. But that funding is also coming to an end, so it was great for them to be able to say, and we'd love to talk about continued funding opportunities. So great to see that connection happening, and a wonderful program in the county being highlighted. All right, with that, we will move on to, we have no items pulled from the consent calendar, so we'll move to item 10A. We have administrative items, special districts, and we'll receive a presentation of the Napa Berryessa Resort Improvement District and rate study. So welcome Chris Silke and Director Lederer. Are you going to join us, or thank you for being here? Great.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. And Chris Silk, District Engineer, thank you again for welcoming myself and accompanying me today to give a financial update presentation is Anthony Ilowski. He is with the firm RDN, to which we've retained over the past, going on 5 years, to advise the district on its financial matters. So to get things started, what I'd like to do is give you a recap as to where we are present day. We initiated this financial journey back in 2020 when staff saw that there were going to be budget shortfalls. Okay, we brought that to the attention of the board. We've been here several times to show, a gloomy future in terms of fund balance and expenses and shortfalls on revenue. And then, lo and behold, in August 2020, the wildfire impacted us even more by reducing our customer base by 1/3. Operating budget deficits have been anywhere between $3 to as much as $500,000 annually, and it's purely because we have weak infrastructure. And also, paired with that, there's been numerous unplanned maintenance expenses that have hit the budget. Due to climate change, due to aged infrastructure. And so we did embark upon some revisions as a result soon after the fire. Well, what did that mean, having a 1/3 less customer base? Brought that to the board, and then our mission after that became, okay, well, we have to institute some type of revenue increase measure. And that ended up being a 15% user rate increase. Soon after that, we started another medium household income survey with the hopes that perhaps the community would be found to be economically disadvantaged. And lo and behold, a certified report was released by our consultant, RCAC, and the state water boards found Enbridge to actually be less than that 80% statewide average threshold. Well, what does that mean? That means that Enbridge is potentially eligible for millions of dollars and relief in the form of grants to upgrade its infrastructure. We've done this before. We know what this journey looks like at Berryessa Estates. And we want to continue to do this for the benefit of Enbridge. But that would actually take some prerequisites to be enacted, and that being that we'd have to have a balanced budget to qualify for these funds. And secondly, Enbridge would have to go into the application process showing that it has a balanced budget and also that there would not be insurmountable debt encumbered by the district. To date, we have tallied up $5 million on the books with debt to the county to support the operations and some infrastructure projects to keep things moving along, at least for the near term. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Anthony, and he's going to give us an update as far as the financial projections and also what are the revenue boost options that we see as potential, financial sustainability over the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Board and Madam Chair. We're basically going to go through a rough overview of the 10-year financial plan for Napa Berryessa Resort Improvement District, and then we're going to present 6 rate scenarios. The potential scenarios, scenario 0 would be to do nothing with the rates, and you'll see the results of that scenario in the financial plan. Scenarios A and B, A1 and A2 involve a rate adjustment. And that the difference between 1 and 2 is either doing a multi-year stepped adjustment, or 2 would be doing a single adjustment, which would cover the 5 years of the rate setting period. Scenarios B1 and B2 would include both a rate adjustment and an additional special tax. 1 and 2 follow the same pattern, where 1 would be a multi-year adjustment and 2 would be a single year adjustment plus the special tax. Scenario C would be only a special tax solution, so the customer rates, their bi-monthly rates would stay the same. However, there would be a larger tax that is paid by the property owner every year. And then finally, we're hoping to receive comments and direction on which way to move forward with this. So the brief overview of the operating position of the water and sewer utilities. The red line shows the revenue for both water and sewer. That's combined revenue. The bars show the annual expenses. The orange of the bars are the water operating expenses, and the green are the sewer operating expenses. The blue bars include planned capital pay-go. Pay-go in this situation is not planned for the outer years because there is not enough money to finance currently in the budget and the available funding for those utilities. You can see that the red line is below the bars in each year here, meaning that you will be spending money more than you're making, which will result in revenue shortfalls and ultimately spending of any reserve funds that are available to the district. This shows the current ending balance for fiscal year 2025, which will be ending in June 30th this year. Under that status quo financial plan, you can see these reserve levels going negative in the next year. And continually going lower and lower, and that's just basically covering operating expenses because there are no major planned capital expenditures under this. Chris did mention that there is significant capital expenditures that are needed because of the aging infrastructure in the area, so expect these numbers to be even lower if any of that capital needs to come up in this time frame. So we did look at the financial plan as far as setting a few goals. Each of these scenarios that we're going to look at is going to try to achieve these goals. For 1, it'll be fully funding operations and maintenance expense for both the water and the sewer. It'll be fully funding capital needs, and those are the ones that are planned for the next couple of years. And then building a cash reserve. The cash reserve was set at $1.2 million at the end of the 10-year period, and that is in lieu of there being significant capital spending in the financial plan. So the series of rate adjustments for each of the scenarios that I outlined at the beginning. Scenario 0 would be a total increase of 0. There is currently an annual assessment of $240 on each parcel. So that will not change either under that scenario. Scenario 1A, A1 and A2 include multi-year adjustments in 1, and these are purely to the rates. So the impact on the rates under scenario A1 would be an initial adjustment of 60%, followed by 20%, followed by 10, followed by 6, and then it would go basically to, you would be able to solve the rest of the years using CPI inflationary adjustments. Scenario A2 solves the problem in 1 year, so that would be an initial adjustment of 95% to the rates, so basically doubling the rates for customers and maintaining that same assessment of 240. And then each year after that would be a CPI increase for inflationary measures. Scenario B1 and B2 include a special assessment. The assessment for a habited parcel is $800 per year, and for an uninhabited parcel would be about $400 per year. These are the numbers which include the current assessment of 240 per parcel. So it would be an additional of $560 for a habited parcel and about $160 for an uninhabited parcel in the assessment. You can see that the adjustments needed for the rates specifically, and these under the bi-monthly rates for service, are quite a bit lower in both of these scenarios. And then finally, the scenario C is a 0, so it would continue to maintain the current rates, and all of the revenue shortfall would be assessed through that special assessment. The special assessment in this case would be about $2,200, $2,150, and you would not have to charge any more for the bi-monthly bills, looking at our financial plan. And all of these scenarios reach the exact same goal of $1.2 million after 10 years, as well as covering operating expenses and the currently planned capital expenditures. For the impact on the actual rates, an annual bill which includes average usage as well as the parcel assessment would be in scenario 0. So currently customers pay about $2,600 per year. That would go up and down based on their actual usage, but this is an average customer. Under each scenario, you can see what that impact is year over year. So the first rate adjustment would occur in fiscal year 2026. For scenario A1, that bill would go up to $4,000 per year. In scenario A2, that would go to $4,800, again, basically doubling, as I mentioned. Whereas if you apply the parcel tax, there is more revenue being collected through that parcel tax. And so the actual rates are going down. And again, these include both the rate and the parcel tax, but it is a more stable revenue. Finally, scenario C, you apply that full parcel tax in the first year, and it maintains that total rate impact of about $4,500 each year of the 10-year study. And I did make a graph which shows sort of the same information. You can see scenario 0, which would be the do nothing, which would be the go about $6 million in debt, or the county would continue to provide loan service to the district. And each of the following scenarios and their ultimate impact. At the end of 10 years, scenario 2 does have the lowest overall impact, though initially in the first year, it is a higher initial impact to customers in that area. Are there any questions on the financial planning or the scenarios before I pass it back to Chris?
Nope, thank you.
All right.
Okay.
This may be the right time to ask this.
Sure.
With a special tax, remind us, scenario C is special tax only.
Correct.
Rates stay the same.
Right.
Are there terms for paying the special tax? Is it one lump sum?
Correct.
Once a year, or is there a way to pay
Right.
that over
It
time?
would be seen on the property tax roll.
Oh, gotcha. So we'll split into two.
Split in
Yes.
two.
Got it. Okay,
Correct.
thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that question.
Okay, so thank you, Anthony. So in concluding, I wanted to present you with our roadmap with these hard proposals. These are difficult conversations to have with the community that we're going to engage them in on November 13th. But the reality is the utilities, they need a lot of attention here and some initiative or initiatives passed to bring them back to better financial health. That coupled with the fact that right now we have before us, potentially a once in utility generation opportunity to take advantage of grants. If we lose that window, there is the potential that each parcel could be burdened with an encumbrance somewhere between $35,000, $45,000 per parcel in loan to update the infrastructure. So, we either act now, do nothing, wait till, further, extenuating circumstances behold the residents there. I'd like to think that there is, optimism for economic prosperity out there. That's obviously a topic for another day, another meeting. But, there is reason for us, if we move forward with passing some financial measure here, that we could open some doors to get utilities hardened, to get them resilient to climate change that's occurring out in the Berryessa area, and also to not have our operations budget bleeding cash annually. And that's what's going on right now. So with that, and just in closing too, here's our roadmap over the next 8 months. I'd like to engage the board in a discussion after this slide to see what your thoughts and guidance perhaps might be under the options that Anthony presented us with. But we want to push forward with one or both of these proposals and bring them to the community as a starter, and then get moving forward in 2025 with the hopes that by July, we're on a pathway to financial sustainability. So with that, I will open it up to the board.
Great. And I see Supervisor Gregory has a question. I just wanted a clarification on that last slide.
Yes.
The work that we're talking about is infrastructure and capital expense, correct?
Correct.
So if Prop 5 passes, does that offer the potential that the 2/3 threshold could lower to 55%?
Oh, boy. I think that's probably a better question for our district council than myself to
Okay.
answer at this point, to understand what the potential impacts are to the 2/3 vote that's needed,
Okay.
for a special tax. So if you'd like, I'll confer with our district council on that.
That would be great. Supervisor Gregory.
Yeah, well, Prop 5 is just only for issuance of bonds, not for any special taxes, so it would not change this one. So that special tax gets passed, that's locked in for how long? Is there a term on the special tax?
That could be part of the measure and
part
the
of the
language
discussion.
that's built into it in the
Okay.
discussion, that it could have a specific term limit.
Okay, so, but
but-
let's say there's no, let's just say there's no limit, and we're successful in getting a grant. The cost, annual cost stays the same. Essentially, what we might be doing then is mitigating future rate increases.
That's what we're doing.
That's
We're
what we're doing.
offsetting future rate increases. Again, with a planned economic plan that potentially brings in a resort development that sees future build out of homes to where we're expanding our customer base, and perhaps in the future, 10 years from now, there could be less dependence on a special tax, and the user rates provide sufficient revenue.
Yeah. Okay. And then last time you were here, I believe you were going to go have some community meetings and float some of these options.
We did.
What did
yeah.
we learn about that?
So, we learned obviously there are those that are challenged being on fixed income, okay, and that there are strains on people that own multiple parcels out there that feel that it's going to be difficult for them to market those parcels. And it's what everybody's facing with their household budgets right now. It's hardship. So, trying to go out to the community and say, well, we need more pay in here. It's a very difficult conversation, but we've had that in the past with Berryessa Estates. So that's the reality of the situation is that we have an opportunity here again that Berryessa Highlands could, over the long term, and when I say long term, I'm talking about the life cycle of the assets, 20, 30, maybe even 40 years, to where we have full subsidy and recapitalize these assets, that window may not open again.
Supervisor Pedroza.
Thank you, Chair. And Chris, thank you for doing this. I had a similar question to Supervisor Gregory about the community meetings. You know, look, I look at this as we must do it. You know, we've been buying time, we've been borrowing money, we've allocated money to the district. I've cautioned us, this is why we shouldn't do special districts in the future. But in terms of the community, you know, I look at it in two buckets. Those that live there, it's their primary home, and it's affordable. It has been seen as affordable. I'm very sensitive to the impacts to that category of people. So I want to make sure we're hearing, is a rate increase better, or is it a parcel, right? Those are the two options from what I'm understanding are on the table. If you own multiple parcels and you're thinking about the marketability of your parcels, that's a second bucket. So I think we just have to be sensitive to, I know who I want to help in my district, and it's those that chose to live in the community because it was affordable to continue to be a resident of Napa County. So I would really prioritize to try to gain feedback from that specific cohort of people that I'm very sensitive to, because you and I were at that community meeting that was pretty vocal.
Yes.
And you remember hearing the anxiety in people's voice. I still remember that. So that's why I want to make sure as we embark on this, I can support either one because we have to do it. I just want to make sure if you're looking for a direction today, it's one thing. If it's the community meetings and continuing to learn more about what's more realistic, I'd like some feedback on that from either one of you.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so obviously we want to hear from all constituents, residents, parcel owners, customers, all demographics, okay, at Berryessa Highlands, and understand what these impacts mean to them, okay? And then ultimately weigh that decision upon, you know, who we don't want a particular bucket, as you call it, carrying the heaviest load, right? We want to try to make this as equitable as possible across the entire community and accomplish that means. So, yeah, I mean, we're going to, you know, I would expect it'll be a highly attended meeting on November 13th. I wouldn't expect anything different. I would hope that there's going to be, well, representation.
Yeah.
And we've already noticed the community about this meeting, and we want to hear from them. And also we want to hear, if they have a proposed solution, we want to hear it. Bring it to the table.
Good.
Let's have a dialogue.
I appreciate that. And then just my last comment. I think a phased approach to soften the economic impact is probably going to be the best way to go around it. So
Okay,
thank you.
sure, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the comments, both of you. And I agree, Supervisor Pedroza, with the point that I also agree we have to do this. And so the question is, what's the vehicle to do it? And I think, first of all, thank you for the clarification on Prop 5. I mean, it is possible for a special district to do a bond. So, you know, that might be a third way, something that we look at in this mix. And I think, I guess a question for you is, in these public meetings, are you getting a sense that people understand it's kind of one of the options that Anthony presented? It's not sort of, do we do something or don't we? It's which of these really challenging options do we take? Are you seeing that the residents that you've spoken with see this as we have to pick one of these challenging options?
Oh, we do. I mean, there are those that understand the financial ramifications, okay? And then there is, you know, the households that are economically disadvantaged, and then those that are on fixed income. Those are the ones that are going to be most outspoken about do nothing, obviously, right? Because this impacts their ability to live. And you know, unfortunately, right now at the moment, we've done everything that we can tap into for state programs, for financial assistance, for families that are struggling. And we have a really, really good track record of doing that. But those programs have expired. And now we are faced with these decisions where utilities have to stand on their own legs. And they have to do so financially. Yeah, so I mean, November 13th, we'll hear from everybody. We're going to hear, and we'll bring it back to the board and have another conversation about this before we move forward with a roadmap and see what we think is the best pathway going into 25.
Thank you. Supervisor Gregory, do you have another comment? Okay. Supervisor.
I do. So are you looking for us to find consensus today on B or C? Or just give you some input on both?
Well, first of all, I'd like input on both. If you, as a board member, have a particular preference as to either option, I'd like to hear that before we go out to the community. And then secondly, you know, again, there are these prerequisites that Enbridge would have to have in place to pursue the grant money, that particularly being county debt relief, you know, and where the board would stand on that issue.
Supervisor Pedroza.
There's history for that. We did it for Berryessa Estates.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
So just I want
Yes.
in the fair with the lens of equity,
Right.
I would say that if we'd done it for Berryessa Estates residents are no different than Berryessa Highlands residents. So
Correct.
I probably won't be here, but I fully expect everyone to measure with the same measuring stick on that.
Right.
Yeah,
Correct.
no, and thank you for that point. I think that's important here is to understand what the history is across these special districts. And so the equity point makes a lot of sense to me as well. So back to Supervisor Gregory's point, the direction that you're looking for is input, but not necessarily consensus.
At this point, yes. I think, you know, if you have a particular preference, whether it be increasing user rates or this hybridization model of user rates in combination with a special tax, which is a little bit of a heavier lift because now 2 measures have to pass, versus a simple across the board 552 lots special tax.
Okay. So I'll give you, go ahead.
Can we go back to the slide that shows that summary? Go back to the slide that shows the summary of total costs per year.
Right there.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
So maybe we could just go down and sort of give some comments on each. I think Supervisor Pedroza started with the point that makes a lot of sense of, you know, something that eases people into it. I will say for me, scenario C is simple and you know it's the same across years, but it doesn't have that soft entry, which I think is important to understand. I also think the fact that that shows up, I think from what you guys are saying on the tax bill, there's an, you know, getting lumped in with a number that's already big. I don't know if that makes it any easier, but that might be easier than the monthly increase. And then finally, my last comment, and then I'd like to hear from these guys as well, is the hybrid ones feel complicated, and going out to the community to ask for 2 different measures, I think is a big lift. So I'm probably less in favor of one of those options.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Chair, I would agree. I think it's either one or the other. I want to caution us, you know, not too long ago, we were having discussions about having to accept parcels where people were not paying some potential debt. So I use that as basis for trying to have a soothing effect. So that way we're not creating financial burdens where people walk away from the parcels. We've done that before, and I think our treasurer tax collector remembers that. So that was a financial impact to this institution, to the county of Napa. So that's why I think whether it's scenario A, where it's a soothing effect or a phasing effect to lessen the impact, is probably where I would lean. Again, I would want us to hear from the community around their preferences as well, of what they believe they can tolerate, acknowledging that the do-nothing scenario is not on the table. So, thank you.
Yeah,
Right.
that makes sense. And just to note for the record that our Mr. Minahan is sitting in the audience nodding his head about the loss of income from that, which is basically the scenario C that we'd be looking at. So that's maybe another argument against that one. Supervisor Gregory.
Yeah, I think if there's any direction we give you today, it should be that we don't plan to approach to go with the status quo. We're going to do something. To have an election for a special tax and a Prop 218 process at the same time is, as you've said, a huge lift. I've been involved with the Prop 218 processes at Napa Sand, and that by itself is a huge lift. And I like scenario C. There's just something different about monthly cash flow and planning to pay your tax bill. Kind of two different things for most people who can't afford to impound against their tax bill. And then on the debt, I totally agree. I think it's the ultimate kicking the can down the road if we think we're ever going to not write that off. So I think a future board should look at that very seriously.
Thank you. No, I think those are great points. And I think it's also the fact that you can go to these community meetings and say, the board knows that something has to happen, and we want to understand from all of you sitting here in the public meeting in Berryessa what your pain points are felt most strongly.
Right, sure. Well, thank you for that feedback, and I will certainly convey, your messages as well as the measures that you feel would, at least ease the burden and how we phase that in.
Got it. Thank you both. Any other questions?
Vice Chair Cottrell, I don't believe we took public comment yet on this item.
Right. So we will go ahead and open for public comment. Is there anyone in the room who wishes to make public comment? Anyone on the phones? Okay. With that, I will say thank you both, and we'll look forward to a report after the first public meeting?
Correct.
Is that the plan? Okay.
Yes.
So let's kind of think about a rough timeline. Would that be sometime in January that we would hear back from you? Or
It would be early January.
early January. Great. Okay, so
Yes.
we will plan on that. All right. Thank you very
Great.
much.
Thank you.
All right, that will bring us to item 11A. We will receive a presentation on recent actions of the State Insurance Commissioner to improve conditions on California's property insurance market and potential next steps. I will welcome Andrew Mize to the table. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning. Thank you all for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm here upon the referral of Supervisor Cottrell at a prior meeting of your board to provide an overview of changes to the regulatory environment of California's property insurance market since late 2023. I should note from the outset that this overview is primarily focused on Napa-specific impacts and targets. We could talk for a long time about the intricacies of the regulatory changes, but what really matters to our public is how it will affect them and what this board can do to prepare for those changes. Members of the public interested in further discussion may contact me at the email address included in the concluding slide of this presentation. And those slides will be posted following the meeting on the county's agenda website, attached to the item on today's agenda corresponding to this presentation. Let's talk first about the state of play. These regulatory changes are happening because California's property insurance market is at or near a tipping point. The top 12 property insurers in California represent 85% of the total market, and 7 of the 12 have paused or restricted new business since 2022. In addition, hundreds of thousands of property owners from Brentwood to Mount Shasta have received notices of non-renewal. This is because of heavy losses sustained by insurers in California's market over the past 5 to 10 years. There are 3 main causes of these losses. Wildfires are more destructive because of more extreme heat and wind, and due to new development outside existing urban cores. The second, insurers in California presently lack the ability to use forward-looking models to justify their rates to the California Department of Insurance. And finally, insurers lack the ability to factor in the rising costs of their own insurance policies from global firms. This is a process known as reinsurance. The Department of Insurance can't really address the impacts of climate change, but it can address the latter two. So that's what we'll be talking about today. Separately, but relatedly, the state-mandated Fair Access to Insurance Requirements Plan, or we'll call it the FAIR Plan from here on out, an insurer-funded plan of last resort that offers more limited coverage and is not subject to the same pricing regulations as standard insurance, has grown statewide from 154,000 policyholders in 2019 to 408,000 5 years later in 2024. The FAIR Plan currently, as a result, has approximately $393 billion in exposure and has just $200 million in reserves. This makes insolvency not just possible but likely in the event of a big disaster that affects a significant number of FAIR Plan policyholders. So a thesis, I think, would be these regulatory changes are going to present Napa County an opportunity to create additional return on its investment in wildfire mitigation. Let's talk today about how we can achieve that return on investment. Okay, I'm going to talk very briefly about a few key terms. Insurers undertake two interrelated processes in conducting business. They do underwriting, which is the decisions they're making about coverage based on past localized losses on a parcel and forecasted future risk. They're using a few different models to determine this future risk. Underwriting is not currently regulated by the Department of Insurance. Rate making, meanwhile, is the process of insurers applying to the Department of Insurance to set rates they can charge for coverage. Only past losses can be used as justification for these changes. This is what the current regulatory proposal seeks to address. The process of forecasting future risk is known as catastrophe modeling. This is a probabilistic forecasting that runs thousands of simulations on a particular area, on a particular parcel, to determine how a disaster might affect it. Use of catastrophe modeling is currently permitted in 49 of 50 states. In California, because we don't allow catastrophe modeling, there's asymmetry between what investors are allowed to use to set their rates before the California Department of Insurance and what they actually use in making coverage decisions. Their models are telling them there's substantial risk associated with a coverage of a parcel based on future risk, but they're not allowed to take that into account when they go before the insurance commissioner and say, this is what we'd like to charge. It creates a scenario for them where they're unable to find a balance in their profit-seeking venture. Their response has been to cut their books down to a size that they find sustainable over the long term, and that minimizes the risk of insolvency, given the artificially low rates that they can actually get approved. Property owners, meanwhile, have two options once they've been cut from that book of business. They can go to the FAIR Plan, which hundreds of thousands of them have done, or they can get better coverage through surplus line carriers, but that coverage lacks the regulatory backstop that the admitted market has and that the FAIR Plan has. It's two not very good options. So let's talk about what the insurance commissioner can do. The first and primary vehicle for fixing California's insurance market is the state insurance commissioner. CDI has three primary goals. First, more coverage options for consumers, more insurers participating in the admitted market, and finally, fewer FAIR Plan policyholders. A combination of those three things, those three outcomes, is the best way to stabilize the insurance market. CDI aims to achieve this primarily by permitting the use of catastrophe modeling in rate making. This will allow insurers to justify rates using the probabilities of future loss rather than only hard evidence of past losses. And this should bring the asymmetry that we talked about earlier into better alignment. Insurers will be able to use the same data in setting rates and in the decisions that they make. this new flexibility comes with a trade. Insurers can use catastrophe modeling in a rate-making application only if they agree to cover at least 85% of homes in an area set by the insurance commissioner. He's promulgated lists of 28 counties and 352 zip codes for residential parcels and 1,160 zip codes for commercial parcels. Nearly all of Napa's zip codes are on both of those lists. There's one small zip code south of Oakville that includes a couple of residential parcels, UC, experimental vineyard, and commercial vineyard that's not included on the residential list. And I'm not sure why that is. That's the only omission. I think it may be because it's a newer zip code. So those lists, they have to commit to writing 85% of the policies in the high and very high fire risk areas within 2 years of the approval of that rate-making application. And they have to commit to 5% growth in the commercial market. Here, let's talk about how this applies to Napa County. Insurers are not given county-by-county targets based on these lists. They just have to pick and choose within these lists to find the mix of parcels that best suits their risk profile in order to hit that target. So this means that the counties on that list and the zip codes and localities on that list are in competition for this new business. This is where Napa's opportunity arises. Napa has put millions and millions of dollars into wildfire mitigation and continues to do so through programs like BRIC. The primary benefit, the primary return on investment to this is, of course, public safety. It's keeping the public safer from wildfires. But we have here a secondary opportunity for return on investment, which is making Napa County as attractive as we can to this new business. In turn, that will make Napa County a more appealing and more attractive place to own property and to live. And I think that's a worthwhile goal. So let's talk some numbers. Particularly residential numbers, as our time is somewhat limited. We don't know the baseline number of parcels that the insurance commissioner is going to set as that 85% target, but we can back into an estimate. In 2020, 1.4 million homes statewide were in high or very high fire hazard severity zones, according to nonpartisan nonprofit organization Next 10, which used tax assessor data to come to that number. 85% of that target is 1.12 million parcels. I think this would be the high-end estimate for what the insurance commissioner might set. It's likely he'll be more conservative, but at the very high end, we're looking at about 1.12 million parcels. Our own tax assessor puts the number of homes in high or very high fire hazard severity zones in Napa County at 4,200-ish parcels. That is about, for reference, about 10% of the parcels in the county and its cities. It makes sense for our target to be 85% of that figure. I think aiming higher would be great, but if we could meet that 85% threshold, that would be 3,600 new policies, new business in Napa County, which again would be just under 10% of our homes that would get new insurance coverage. And I think that would be that's an admirable target to plan for. This should also reduce the number of fair plan policyholders in Napa County. Being a fair plan policyholder and being in a very high fire hazard severity zone are not perfectly correlated, but they are highly correlated. And so in 2019, we had 252 property owners on the fair plan. Currently, we have 2,277 parcels on the FAIR plan. That's an increase of 803% in 5 years, compared to just 164% statewide. So some suggested next steps. The county has a range of operational and strategic options available to it to push for further progress in the state's insurance market. At a local level, we need to continue prioritizing investment in wildfire mitigation and engage with insurers to show them the parcel level and landscape level impacts of our investments. We also need to plan to sustain these investments over time. We don't just need to attract new business, we need to keep it. At a state level, I think we need to continue to support legislative measures that improve outcomes for consumers. In underwriting, the insurance commissioners got rate applications covered. Underwriting heretofore has not been a focus of the state government. And I think there's opportunities either through regulation of the process or through broad-scale transparency and coverage decisions to improve what consumers understand about how insurers underwrite policies. Finally, the federal government's been reluctant to weigh in on state property insurance markets with substantive legislative or regulatory action. I think it's premature right now to ask for legislation or regulatory action by the feds. We still need to see how this plays out. But Congress also possesses substantial oversight authority that it's not using through the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution that it can use to demand data encompassing simple coverage decisions, yes or no, across state lines, that don't involve the disclosure of trade secrets. Similarly, the insurance office within the Treasury Department has opportunity to work with state insurance officials to analyze changes in regulatory policy from state to state and the resulting outcomes to recommend strategies that are proven effective. Two concluding remarks. CDI has expressed optimism that California's property insurance market is at the beginning of a period of positive change after about a decade of turmoil. At a local level, the best thing we can do is to be proactive rather than to wait and see what happens. We can position ourselves to benefit from these changes and benefit our residents and property owners by continuing to make investments in wildfire mitigation and by planning for the future investment needed for maintenance of our current efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really helpful. And yes, you and I have talked about this topic a lot. And when we went back to Washington on the trip accompanying many local vintners, this was a big topic of conversation. And so, but I appreciate how you framed it here, because I think how it matters to our community and what we can do moving forward is really helpful. Are there, Supervisor Pedroza?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andrew. You know, look, there's a lot of information there, and I just want to challenge us. You know, the audience it's that business owner, it's that homeowner. They either got dropped or their premium went up 25%, 30%, 50%, 100%. They're going to look at that and say, okay, what does that mean to me? So I want to challenge us. We know this. We're not the only community facing this either. But what are we going to do differently to ease that burden? And if it's legislation, then let's go 110% on it. If it's showcasing what we've done and how it's actually working, that's another story too, right? But I think people are not going to just accept, like, let's wait to see. You know, people's affordability has dropped. Imagine your primary investment doesn't have insurance. Then you're talking to your bank, who might say, hey, you might be in default of the mortgage note, or that business has millions of dollars in inventory unsecured. Those are the real life examples of what people are facing. So I think our actions have to match that urgency. So again, I totally appreciate what you did. You covered a lot of information, which is not easy to cover. But I think we got to focus on outcomes and action. So we know this is happening, and it's going to continue to happen. So.
Thank you, Supervisor Pedroza. Supervisor Gregory.
Yeah, that was a great presentation. Good job. I love how you brought it down to the local level and gave some examples and numbers. That was good. We've seen reforms come and go before. What's the status of these proposed rules? What process is left? And how hard does local government need to advocate for ourselves?
Supervisor Gregory, I think to answer that, I need to tie together yours and Supervisor Pedrosa's comments. These proposed rules are out there for public comment right now. And some of the best public comments I've seen have been that this is too much about rate making and not enough about underwriting, which the insurance commissioner currently lacks authority to do. So I think some legislative advocacy to bring the underwriting into the picture will have more immediate effect than these regulations. As to affordability, there's no easy way to say it. The likely effect of the likely immediate effect of these regulations will be that for a lot of people, their rates may go up. And this is where local governments can have the biggest impact. They're going to go up because rates have been kept artificially low up until this point. Insurers have not been able to take future risk into consideration when setting rates, and they will be now, and the future risk is not looking good. What local governments can do is we can distinguish ourselves from other counties by being proactive about our fire mitigation efforts, about our landscape level fire mitigation efforts, about the assistance that we provide to homeowners to harden their homes and to do parcel level vegetation management and to maintain that. It's not cheap to remove trees, and I think we have opportunities to help defray that cost. And even though costs of insurance on the whole, I think, are going to rise over time, we have an opportunity, I think, to buck that trend by working with insurers and engaging with insurers to show results, show that all this investment that we've been putting in has improved public safety and that our residents deserve lower rates because of that. So to Supervisor Gregory, I think that would be my response to your point.
Yeah. And I think I think these are both great points that my colleagues have brought up. And this question about outcomes, Supervisor Pedrosa, is like, what can we do to actually see something? And I think on the legislative front last year, we as a board supported SB 1060, which would have forced insurers to include wildfire mitigation in their underwriting. And I went to the Senate Insurance Committee to testify on that. That bill didn't pass, but I think that efforts like that are going to continue to be important. These lobbying trips to DC, I think, are important. And then we have Mr. Hsu in the room. He and I sat on a panel a couple weeks ago with insurers who are insuring local wineries, right, to really pitch how much is happening here. So I think there's a lot of things happening on the ground. I think at the end of the day, we need to show the effectiveness of all our wildfire mitigation work, how that really translates to reducing risk. So I guess that's to add to the challenges. How do we show we didn't just spend $1 million on a grazing shaded fuel break, all those things? How we need the numbers, and we need to work with our fire teams to show that actually translates into a reduced risk that insurers can kind of take to the bank, if you will. So I think that's worth noting for sure. Also, I thought that was a great presentation, and Supervisor Pedrosa, I think you got the most photos from your district in those overviews too. So, but that again, being able to link what's happening at a higher level and a policy level to what we're doing on the ground and how we can use what we're doing on the ground, because at the end of the day, it's public safety, it's insurance availability, it's reducing those fair plan numbers, because we've all heard from residents that that is just not a sustainable solution. Again, to this point about availability of insurance, I talked to a resident in Angwin who's doing a fire rebuild and then can't afford the insurance to support the rebuild. So he's in a catch-22 there. Anyway, Supervisor Pedrosa, you had another comment.
Just another comment, and I do want to give credit to the Napa Valley vendors who put on, I think it was like a workshop, and they brought some of these insurers in. They're the audience, right? I think the insurance commissioner can do great, but it's speaking to who is talking about risk. And maybe that's an opportunity for us to engage with some of them a little bit more directly and not use a conduit to get our message out there, but to show. Because I do believe when they brought those insurance, and they were, from London all over the world, and they got to see firsthand what we were doing, they go back and figure that out, right? So I think, Andrew, I think that might be an area where it can work parallel to what we're doing, right, with the lobbying efforts. But our representatives are getting asked every day from someone about something, right? So how are we different? And I think that's where I think we can differentiate ourselves a little bit. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's actually one of the quotes I heard from a London insurer. She said, after she heard all these examples from wineries, from Dave Shue, she said, wow, it's great to know there are smart people on the ground working on this. And we felt like, well, yeah, so sometimes it's not a report. It's actually, and I appreciate that so many of them came out here and got on the ground to see that. So thank you so much. Is there any public comment in the room on this topic or on the phones? Okay. And I see Mark Van Gorder in the audience too, and just thank you for all that PG&E is doing to try to help us reduce the risk as well. So thank you. All right, with that, we will move on to agenda item 11B, and we will receive a presentation regarding the Community Assistance, Recovery, and Empowerment Act and related court and implementation in Napa County. And we will welcome Director Jennifer Yasumoto and her team.
Hi, good morning, Chair and members of the board. Jennifer Yasumoto, Health and Human Services Agency Director. Sorry, I'm struggling a little bit with my voice. We are pleased to have a distinguished team here today to provide an overview for you of the upcoming CARE Act. In advance, I think we're now T-minus a little over 5 weeks to the implementation of CARE Act here in Napa County, which has to be implemented by December 1. Before the team here gets going, though, I just wanted to really acknowledge the fact that we do have Judge Scott Young here in the audience here joining us, and he has been a member of a planning committee that's been meeting for many, many months leading up to this. We also have Chris Keeley, who's our public defender here, also part of our team that's been threshing through the details here. And then at the table before you have Cassandra Islami. She's our Deputy Director of Health and Human Services over Behavioral Health. We have Valerie Cahill, who's a Behavioral Health Manager with Behavioral Health over Forensic Services. And we have our newly appointed Supervising Mental Health Counselor, Brian Roy, who is stepping in to help lead the charge for us in the area of the CARE Act. One of the things that I also wanted to do, because your board, we've been laying the foundation, as you know, these things don't come to life magically. We've been laying the foundation over time for preparing for a CARE Act, as you know, many counties have. And back in the spring, we actually brought an agenda item, it was on your consent calendar, to partner with the city of Napa to purchase a housing unit consisting of 6 units to specifically provide the housing component for participants of the CARE Act. And at that time, it was on consent, and what I really wanted to do was just really highlight that that was a partnership with the city of Napa, and specifically acknowledge and thank Molly Radigan. That was an item that was a $1.5 million purchase, and that was a shared contribution, $750,000 each from Health and Human Services and from the city of Napa. And I think that kind of partnership just really kind of goes and should be amplified and acknowledged. And you'll hear about really how that incorporates into the readiness that we have. And of course, your board approving positions in budgets that allow us to be prepared and ready and have people in place who can lift this off the ground. And I also want to also acknowledge our county court staff, Bob Fleshman and Maureen Larson, who worked tirelessly with us behind the scenes to make sure that the legal aspects of CARE Court, in addition to the treatment aspects, really do come together. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to our team here who's going to walk you through a PowerPoint. Thanks.
Good morning, Vice Chair and Board. Thank you so much for having us today. As Director Yasamoto mentioned, my name is Cassandra Islami, and I'm our HHSA Deputy Director with Behavioral Health. And we are excited to share with you about our upcoming launch of CARE Act. CARE Act was signed by Governor Newsom in September of 2022. So we, as Jennifer mentioned, have had a couple years to really work on the launch of CARE Act, as well as look at the Cohort 1 counties, which include counties like Glenn, Orange, San Francisco, and San Diego, to gain more data on their care experience. So the CARE Act is really aimed at providing behavioral health wraparound treatment to people who are experiencing schizophrenia or other psychotic disorders. So these are people who live within our community that have often been very resistant to treatment and also very hard to reach to get into services and provide treatment to. The CARE Act is a new model which allows a wide array of petitioners. So community members, family members, law enforcement, and other members of our community can petition for clients to come into CARE Act, which is really a new model versus trying to get people in through a front door for access to services. Napa County will go live with CARE Act prior to the required December 1st date, and we are up and ready to go and really excited to launch soon. So I just wanted to share a little bit about what the CARE Act is really targeting. So we're really targeting these hard-to-reach people with acute psychotic symptoms, and these are often clients who are experiencing homelessness within our community. So we know that schizophrenia only makes up about 1% of the overall population, but we know of those who are experiencing homelessness, the data point varies between 20 to 30% of those people are diagnosed with schizophrenia, as well as up to 15% of the state jail population. 24% of the jail population, and in California up to 15%. We've seen a significant increase of serious mental illness within the California prison population, which rose from 6.4% in 2020 to 9.2% in 2023. So CARE is really designed as an upstream diversion, and it's really looking at different supports and behavioral health treatment models to really target people for success in the CARE Act programming. So in CARE Act, with our community partners as well and our county partners, we're going to offer medication services, wraparound behavioral health services, which can include Mental Health Services Act full service partnership programming, as well as housing. So this is a newer treatment model to really wrap around the individual and provide stabilization through housing, then medication support, as well as behavioral health services. So really giving a person everything we think they would need to stabilize and hopefully stay on medication and make positive gains towards recovery.
So this slide depicts the crossover and similarities between assisted outpatient treatment, which was formerly known as Laura's Law, and CARE Act. They do have similarities, and they're really, CARE Act further broadens the opportunities for engagement and treatment beyond what AOT does, and really it's meant as an intervention prior to conservatorship for folks so that they're less likely to have a result in long-term care. The folks involved in CARE Act process are the respondent themselves, the petitioner, it's a civil court process, the public defender, it could be the conflict public defender or a private attorney, county behavioral health branch, and the voluntary supporter if desired. It should be noted that the voluntary supporter is an individual that the respondent picks themselves, someone that they find support from and who can help walk them through the process. It can be a friend, it can be a family member, it could be somebody that they're already currently working with. Napa County Behavioral Health has successful models of court and HHSA service collaboration, which we've had for a number of years. We have drug court, we have mental health court, which have been in implementation for beyond a decade. And more recently, we have assisted outpatient treatment. Napa Care will be based upon the supportive team approach designed to improve participant engagement, similar to those that we have already created. Individuals who are eligible for the CARE Act process have to be 18 years or older, have a serious mental health disorder in the class of schizophrenia spectrum, and other psychotic disorders, but is not caused by a medical condition. The person is not clinically stabilized in ongoing voluntary treatment, and they're unlikely to survive safely without supervision, and the condition is substantially deteriorating, or the person is in need of services to prevent relapse or deterioration that would likely result in grave disability or serious harm to either themselves or to others. The CARE Act plan is the least restrictive alternative, and it should be noted that the person will benefit from the CARE Act plan or agreement. A clinical opinion is needed, or 2 5250 holds, with one being written within the last 60 days prior to the petition.
Here we have a broad overview of the workflow process for CARE Act, beginning with the petition, moving to a clinical review and evaluation, and then implementation and development of a CARE plan, followed by all of the supports that are identified within that plan for the period of a year. At the end of that year, we have a graduation or a review if further engagement would benefit the respondent. And the respondent in this case is what we often in mental health refer to as the client. So within the CARE agreement or plan is a review of available services and how they might benefit the respondent. That would include basic mental health care, also medications, and housing as a stabilizing force within it. This plan or agreement is developed with the respondent themselves, county behavioral health, their legal counsel, and anybody that they identify as a support in that process. There is a distinction in the CARE Act between an agreement and a plan, and that distinction is that the agreement would be where an individual, after learning about it and hearing what we can do to help them, voluntarily engages in that plan. And if they are not willing to voluntarily engage, then the court can put in an order for participation, and that is called a plan. The plans are valid for up to a year. And within that time, there are regular status update hearings with the entire team, including the court. So the CARE plan can include full service partnership services, and that's like wraparound services that takes into account all of an individual's support and stabilization needs, not only to stabilize, but also to thrive within the community. That includes a review of housing, which has been discussed, and individual services that someone might benefit from. So this population that is targeted by CARE often has really difficult health outcomes across the board. So that would include medical care and things like that, dental. And medications under the CARE Act can be ordered, but they cannot be forced. So this is just a distinction that kind of frees psychiatrists from an ethical dilemma around prescribing medications when somebody's saying, I don't have a mental health disorder, I don't need this. The court can still, with a medical opinion, go ahead and allow them to be ordered. As was stated earlier, Napa County, in partnership with the city, has purchased a 6-bed housing unit. This is going to be operated in collaboration with Mentis, which Napa County has a long and really positive history of helping stabilize members of our community so that they can really get their feet under them and thrive. Jumping back for a moment to the petition itself, this is a state drafted through the Judicial Council 6-page document that's pretty robust, where we identify through whoever's filling it out kind of history, what the challenges for the individual are. As stated earlier, that needs to be supported by a clinical declaration or recent hard evidence of serious psychiatric decompensation. Upon receiving that petition, the court makes a quick face value determination if it appears that the individual meets criteria to enter into the CARE Act support system. If they do not, the case doesn't go forward, but that doesn't mean that an individual is not going to have access to stabilizing and supportive health care and treatment. If that petition does meet the initial review, then behavioral health has 14 days to conduct a kind of a review and investigation to really identify if this person is fully fitting into the care criteria and submitting a report for review on that with the court. Jumping forward now to eventual success within CARE. CARE is a 12-month program. At 11 months, all the team members on the court get together to review what's going on in the case and determine if there is going to be a graduation for successful completion of the program, or if an individual would benefit from continuing in care. And that can be determined by the court as necessary and re-enroll somebody for up to a year, or an individual can essentially raise their hands with counsel and say, I'm benefiting from this and I'm not ready to have a reduction in the level of support that I'm getting. So as we've talked about, this is a really difficult to engage population, and this is a population that the county has continuously made efforts towards that for many years. So we do see this as being success hinging on good collaborative engagements with our community and internal partners. Particularly, we have law enforcement that comes into contact with some people, but a lot of this population is so internally preoccupied that they might not actually be doing things that rise to the level of violating a statute. So oftentimes we might see fire and EMT and abode homeless services coming into contact with them, or hospitals within the county. Additionally, we have our internal partners at the Crestwood Crisis Stabilization Unit, our mobile outreach team, and FSP has outreach teams around the community as well to help us identify people that could benefit from this. In addition to the general public who have family members or neighbors that they think might really benefit from programming. The county court has been extremely helpful in partnering on this and has developed a website where members of the community can access all the information available about CARE. That site is directly linked to the state resources, so everything is always up to date. It also has a helpful kind of walkthrough on who qualifies for CARE. And then additionally, for anybody who might read the qualifications and think the person I have in mind doesn't meet this criteria, we have a live link over to our mental health access department so that those individuals are not left behind and they can still get in and benefit from all of the other array of services that we have with the county. And with that, conclude.
We appreciate the opportunity to share with you about CARE Act this morning. We're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you so much to the whole team for the presentation. And I'm so glad that we have Barry Eberling in the room because this is complicated. I really appreciate the chart that shows kind of what this is and what this isn't. Plus knowing about this website, and I love a good FAQ, so I think that's always great to have, and sending people to other places too. So welcome, Supervisor Ramos, and I know Supervisor Pedroza, you have a question, and then we'll go to you, Supervisor Ramos.
That was me.
Supervisor Gregory.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and I appreciate, they've also, just for my colleagues' sake, you've kept us well up to date at Mental Health Board as you've developed this and moved it forward, so thank you very much. I'm curious about the layman petitioner. So it seems that the biggest difference here with Laura's Law is more people can be a petitioner. So I heard earlier, fill out a 6-page judicial form and find declarations and documents. What does that look like if we really want to open this up to more petitioners?
Good morning, Supervisor Gregory. Great question. We're learning a lot from the Cohort 1 counties around who is actually petitioning, and we're learning that there is more opportunity for public education around the criteria for a client to be enrolled in CARE Act. So the cohort 1 counties are getting a large number of petitions that actually aren't coming through to qualify for CARE Act. So these are often people that are possibly causing disturbances in the community, but haven't had that WIC 5250 hold and or actually don't have a diagnosis of schizophrenia or other psychotic disorders. So I think from our perspective, it really is, as Brian mentioned, the opportunity to do a lot more around community engagement on who qualifies for CARE Act and what kind of behaviors or symptomology you're seeing and how these services really are specifically targeted, especially around psychiatric medication to support the recovery of those with schizophrenia. Anything else on that?
Yeah. It'll be a learning curve.
Yes.
That's what I'm hearing. And then what numbers do we expect? I understand from some of the first counties, the pilot counties, that numbers are a little lower than everybody thought. And if our numbers are low, let's say to begin with, these dedicated housing units, can they be used for something else?
So we are learning from the cohort 1 counties that those numbers are actually much lower than initially anticipated, given that piece that was just mentioned around the petitions coming in, but the client's not actually qualifying. So we've continued to talk with advocates for human potential, who are the subcontractor from the Department of Healthcare Services on the behavioral health bridge housing funding for those units that we have specifically dedicated for CARE Act clients. And what we've worked out with them is that we can also place clients who are experiencing serious mental illness into those beds. We've had a lot of internal conversation around, what will we do if a CARE Act client then comes into the CARE Act program and we have that bed being used by another client who is experiencing serious mental illness. So we've been able to work with them to utilize some of the other funding and different allocations, including motel vouchers or rental assistance, to then move somebody out who's experiencing serious mental illness into a different housing unit. So we're trying to be super creative to make sure that we have housing for our behavioral health clients, and we also don't want to see our beds go unused. So it's a delicate balance and kind of a situation that we are going to be closely monitoring, but we want to make sure that we support all of our clients in our community and provide access to housing whenever we can.
Thank you. Supervisor Ramos.
Thank you. I very much appreciate the team. We've been through the trenches in Care Court, Director Yasumoto and I, for a number of years on this, so it's good to see us being at this stage. I have a couple of questions, and I think a lot of it maybe we'll be punting over to Director Yasumoto, really dealing with our enterprise data system and how we're going to utilize that. Certainly the numbers are very low. When you look at some of the large counties like Stanislaus County, that they've got, I think, 15 people. So that's a small number. But one of the questions that I had in terms of from a data collection, understanding Care Court is confidential, so there's not a lot of data, but on our end, how we are going to track specifically the housing side of things, because some people in cohort 1, some of the participants of cohort 1 counties are housed in non-county facilities, so can be housed with family members. There's some that are actually housed in county correctional facilities. And so this is all new, and how we're going to track that movement, because if Care Court is housing first, how are we going to coordinate that very movement of what if the family decides we don't want you to live with us anymore? What if we have an exit out of our correctional facility, and how we plan in that sense?
Good morning, Supervisor Ramos. Thank you for the question. So I think there's a couple components in response to your question, and I would say kind of for the first part, we recently hired a behavioral health housing manager, and one of that person's kind of primary responsibilities is really to closely monitor the behavioral health housing stock that we have to ensure if there's transition of clients or there needs to be movement of clients. Let's say they are living at home with family members and they actually need access to care housing. That's something we will know about very quickly. These services involved with Care Act clients are such high-touch services that they will be seeing our clinicians multiple times a week. So we will know very quickly what's going on with the client and whether or not they need a transition or step up or down in terms of level of housing need or service need. So we will know, and we will work closely with whether it's full service partnership team or Mentis on that transition of housing. And then regarding the data component, I will defer to Director Yasumoto to talk more about the enterprise.
So obviously you touched upon the infrastructure piece of that, and as your board is aware, the InfoVerity product that is being project managed by ITS is a key component of that, because it's going, right now we're still in the process of IT kind of pulling the data out of our EHR, out of CJNet, and out of HMIS, and there's a lot of behind the scenes work being doing on data cleanup, which just kind of highlights the need for data integrity in the various systems before you start pulling them in. So I think that's a wise investment that the county has made, and we're not yet at the point of having usable data out of the system. I think the other piece of that, it's one thing to pull in back-end data, it's another thing to have a front-end case management system, because that's will also be needed to operationalize at the front end, so case managers like Brian and his team can come in and really look real time and see what's happening. So I would say it's a work in progress.
Thank you. I think the next question, and maybe you want to stay there because I've got a few that I think are yours. When we look at counties of similar size to us, I think we had 1 in cohort 1 and 2 in cohort 2. And so I'm wondering, do we have a working group that we are reaching out to these similar sized counties, and we can work with each other on when we look at scalability, right? You talk about the high touch points. High touch means lots of budget adjustments here. This is an expensive program, and it is expensive in not necessarily what you see at the front end, right? You to quantify it. I mean, we're literally changing our data system to be able to accurately support this program at a tune of $2 million about. Yeah, probably when all said and done. And so my question is, are you tracking this with other counties? Is there a basis of comparison, or at least a thought partner group?
So I do know that there are different work groups and cohorts being convened across the state. And so the team here has an opportunity to jump in and sort of learn not just from cohort 1, but as cohort 2 comes online. And you're right, I think for counties that are smaller, and I know sometimes in Napa we feel big, but we're still pretty small, and we're often the smallest of counties in any given meeting. The fixed costs, if you will, of developing the infrastructure to support a program, whether you've got 2 clients running through it or 20, you got to have that readiness and that infrastructure there. We've worked really hard on kind of the budgeting piece too, because you're right. I think with every new mandate that's coming out in behavioral health, there is this ongoing question about what funds it. Your board may remember we do have a $250,000 CARE Act startup cost, so we're going to be using those funds strategically to kind of fill in the nooks and crannies. The state also did drop some administrative dollars that we can tap into based on hourly rates. That alone will not support CARE Act implementation. A good number of the clients we do anticipate being Medi-Cal, and so we can tap into Medi-Cal dollars. The behavioral health bridge housing funds that Deputy Director Islami talked about is also another source of funding. So we are being strategic and looking at probably at least 6 different sources of funding to braid and support this program moving forward.
Thank you. And I'm going to keep you on the funding question. The Prop 1 funds for mental health, realignment to housing, is that the bridge? That is a separate fund, correct? And I'll keep asking the question so you can have a moment. I think our total amount annually is about $220,000 of our allocation of Prop 1 realignment from mental health HSA dollars over to housing. Do you anticipate? We'll get you on.
I'm fine.
Do you anticipate that we'll be utilizing those dollars to support these these 6 housing units on an ongoing basis, or is that still not very well defined?
I think that is still to be determined. Part of our BHBH grant that was referenced, that's a $3.4 million grant. Of course, some of that was used, obviously, to purchase the housing unit, some part of it, I think $450,000. And the remainder of funding is going to be used for things like patches, subsidies, et cetera. I think the whole BHSA and where that's headed and the housing and what percentage we want to exempt to move into treatment versus keep, that's a separate discussion and planning process that's still in play without clear rules for a July 1 of 2026. So that is one more change in the overall behavioral health ecosystem that this team that we are kind of managing to, monitoring, and then figuring out what part of that could supplement this.
Okay. I mean, it's certainly, you know my feelings on this personally. I think we do need to move through the small county exception on that because it only just complicates things to have to braid one more source of funding for the housing component, and it's certainly much easier to have to back it up with a clean dollar, a non-tied dollar than those tied dollars. And then my last one for the team, and going back to the behavioral health housing advocate that you now have, it takes 6 to 12 months to get to bring an unhoused person into the system typically. And so how is that being thought of when understanding there's the plan and then there's the voluntary component? If the goal here is a 12-month plan, when do we anticipate to actually see some measurable, I hesitate to use the word results, but I'd say measurable integration and acceptance of services, because I think that's the goal here. When are we adding that time of getting someone into the whole spectrum of time?
Yeah, it's a really good and fair question because this is a really hard to engage population. For care, there are hard deadlines. So once that petition comes in, you've got to get rolling on the review and the care plan and put it in. So yeah, to your point, if somebody's saying, no, I'm not going to go into that housing, they're not going to go into it, right? We can't force them into it. So I also do think that it is on a continuum, and that some people have maybe engaged with us in the past and we have some buy-in already. I think there's a lot of room for kind of preemptory outreach to really kind of get people comfortable with us first, so that then when we say, hey, we've got this for you, we have this infrastructure already and we can put them in quickly. It's not like a promise of, but now you have to wait 3 months till something opens up, which does happen sometimes, right? Because we don't have dedicated housing in all of our programs. So I think we're going to have to really be thinking on our feet and being compassionately aggressive in helping people feel safe and encouraged to participate with us. So I think we're going to kind of be looking at a bit of a curve on some people we might be able to identify to get in there quickly. And then others we might be able to use as kind of a word of mouth example of like, hey, this is okay. And I don't have to stay there if I'm really uncomfortable, but then we're already with them.
Thank you for the questions and the responses. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess just one other thing I would add to that I think is a feature of sort of the model that this team here, including the court and our public defender, is really a treatment team approach where everybody comes together. We really do want to get the voluntary agreement and the voluntary participation. So even though this has a court process to it, I think this team is really approaching it as a supportive treatment team approach where the team does really contemplate all parts the public defender, the court, the treatment team really coming together in proven models that the team here has talked about with drug court and mental health court and mental health divergence. So we've actually got like really good models and a really collaborative group. And so that's the good feature of a smaller county is we actually have a model for coming together. So hopefully that gives us a little bit of added boost to what we think is possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may, I would also note that we've been meeting with the cohort 1 counties, and they have all noted that while there have been not as many people that have gone through the complete petition process, there have been significant numbers of folks that are engaging voluntarily. So it's always a much higher number, and of course that's what we want to shoot for regardless. We want folks to come in voluntarily and engage in their treatment and feel like they have a say. So I just wanted to note that.
No, that's really helpful, and it's kind of a segue to a couple of the questions I had, because I think hearing about counties like Stanislaus that ramped up for numbers X and Y, and really they were significantly lower, and a little bit of saying, okay, it's costing us this much to stand this program up. What do we do here? So one question, are those counties in that first cohort, are you able to hear from them anything about trending? Are they, and this may be a question that you actually want to answer in a year or two, but, are they seeing more people go all the way through the program or more people diverting? Like you just pointed out, in our own county, we will probably see some folks who are in the program early and then others who come in later on once there's more certainty that this is okay. So any observations from what you see in the other cohorts? And I will just add as the second part of that question, any ideas about if there are significant gaps in expectations, is there any discussion about, if we changed this parameter, we would be able to fold in this person or something like that?
Wonderful questions. I would say we've been learning from the cohort 1 counties. We've also been meeting with the cohort 2 counties for the small counties and discussing a variety of different things in implementation, because there's been a number of counties that have subsequently moved forward. I think it's a learning experience. They're finding that they are having folks engaged at a higher rate, as I'd said, without having to go through the petition process specifically. And the second question, I apologize.
Is there any observation about someone who might be almost eligible but not quite, and any thought to some update to the parameters that, or the screening that would have allowed someone to come in but for, item 3 or something like that?
Absolutely. So if someone doesn't meet criteria under CARE Act, that doesn't mean that they wouldn't meet criteria under full service partnership. So yes, they can be enveloped and folded in under that and still receive intensive care services.
And then final question from all the groups all the counties that you're hearing from, is there a concern about available beds not being, as you were pointing out, maybe not being used by care court that could have been used by someone else? Or is that, I would imagine people are doing what you guys are talking about, which is being flexible, whether it's a voucher program or another program?
Great question. I think that folks at this point are really monitoring what's happening and attempting to be flexible to accommodate as we need to. I suspect we'll be doing the same and sharing that information. We're meeting every other week regarding these issues and questions, and I suspect we'll continue to do that so that we can respond accordingly to the folks that we serve.
Thank you. Any other questions from colleagues? Any questions or comments from the audience today? Public comment? Anyone on the phone line? All right. Well, I want to thank everyone who came today, particularly court representatives. Great to have you guys here too. So thank you everyone for your work on this and for educating us in the community about this program. Thanks. with that, we move on to, we have no public hearings for special districts or public hearings. We have no closed session, so I will go ahead and at 10:49 adjourn this meeting.